I'm here with the celebrated science fiction author William Gibson, who invented the term cyberspace back in the 1980s and hasn't been allowed to forget it since that time. So thanks for coming into the studio and chatting with us today.
Always a pleasure.
So you're here, he's on tour right now for his book of essays called Distrust That Particular Flavor. And this is out in paperback now, although this is the hardback version. And one of the things that you talk about in this book, actually in a number of different essays, is the fact that you're pretty comfortable with the idea that science fiction, even when it's about the future, is really about the present. And I was wondering, what is it that you've kind of brought your books back into the present? Your last trilogy is set in the present. But what is it that you can say about the present by writing about the future that you can't say about the present by writing about the present?
That's a that's one of those questions that, in order to answer it at all, I have to rephrase it so violently that
no, do a violent rephrasing. No, damage it. I'm totally excited for damage.
Well, there is a function. There is a theoretical function of fiction associated with the birth of the novel. And say the Goncourt brothers and their idea of literary naturalism. And that is something that I've always found very interesting, the reportorial possibilities of long-form fiction. And when people do that in my experience, when people do that with contemporary reality in my lifetime, it bores me to death, you know? You get Tom Wolfe's later work, and somehow that's not where it's at. Someone like Don DeLillo he's checking it out and reporting back, but he's not coming back to a literal some sort of literal representation of the place he started from. He's coming back changed by the experience of going out and looking at our unthinkably weird present. Mm-hmm. So my theory, such as it is that almost all science fiction, to some extent, does that, perhaps unintentionally, often unintentionally, but when we read it historically, you know, when it's 50 years old, we go, or older, and we read it, we go, oh yeah, I get it, she was Victorian, or I get it, he was Edwardian. Mm-hmm. And it tells us things, it has the potential to tell us things about the day, the day in which it was written, that the author never intended. And having had that idea in place before I ever began to write fiction or science fiction, I've always sort of had that as a kind of sidelight of everything I'm doing. Like, what am I doing unconsciously that reflects the day in which I've written it? Which is a good question to ask yourself throughout the creation of a long-form, detailed fantasy of any imaginary future, mm-hmm. because when you find those things, you can go, oh, I'll crank that up, and you know, I'm taking something for granted there. But in using it that way, it also came to me that was probably, in the long run, the thing that I was doing that would be most of value to posterity.
To record the present.
Yeah, to record the present in not in a literal way, but this is what this feels like.
Do you think it's easier to write about the present when you've set yourself somewhat into the future or somewhat into the past? Or because you've just had this experience of doing 3 books that are pretty emphatically set right in the now?
Well, actually, those 3 books are very deliberately set in the year prior to their actual publication. So
slightly in the past.
They're speculative novels of the very recent past, or they were on the day.
So alternate history that's 5 minutes into the past.
Yeah, very short, very short term alternate history. But the reason I began to do that, just in terms of the shape of my career, I now think, looking back on it, is that by the time I got to the end of All Tomorrow's Parties, which ends with a kind of quasi-parodic take on the singularity. And by the time I was writing that, I had become painfully self-conscious through this feeling that my yardstick for the weirdness of the moment was an 80s yardstick. It was like it was too old. My idea of extreme weirdness wasn't enough. And I didn't have any sense of where the weirdness of that now was. And that really worried me. And I thought, well, maybe I can't do this sort of thing at all. But what I found in the course of writing those 3 most recent books is that it's given me my yardstick. Like, I know how weird it is. It's okay, it's as weird as those 3 books. That's the now. And in order to do the future thing, I've got the yardstick. So I just say, okay, this is now, and the future is like this.
So you've recalibrated.
Yeah, I've recalibrated. And in fact, I'm writing a book that's set in at least 2 futures simultaneously right now, and one of which is quite recognizable, and the other, I hope, will be almost incomprehensible.
So what can you tell us about the futures that you're portraying in this new novel? Are they 2 alternate futures? Are they one after the other? What can you tell us?
Well, I can't. It would just be the most huge and annoying spoiler to try to explain the relationship. I mean, the discovery of the relationship, if it works, is going to be just really a cool moment. So I can't reveal its ravishing coolness, particularly prior to having written it.
Yeah, no, don't commit to any kinds of coolness now, because you never know what coolness you're going to produce later. But we do know that it's in the future, which, since we were just talking about how basically science fiction is about the present, I wonder if you feel like the present is becoming more futuristic again.
I don't think in my lifetime, I don't think the present has ever not been madly futuristic. I mean, occasionally, as a culture, there's a way we kind of get used to it and kind of go, oh, yeah, iPads, meh.
Gene therapy, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, we get used to it, but I think that's just some kind of organic survival response to the howling wind tunnel of technologically driven change we've been forced down through my whole life now. It never stops. And we, yeah, you know, if we're lucky, it never stops.
One of the things that a number of science fiction writers have been thinking about lately, partly I think spurred by Neil Stephenson's ideas about writing optimistic science fiction, has been trying to create works that are self-consciously encouraging people to think about the future in constructive or positive ways. And I can tell from your kind of eye rolling that you're like, how could you? Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think like, okay, I want to write something that helps people think, you know, that they could have a future where... Well,
actually, in spite of my eye rolling, I thought when I wrote Neuromancer that I was doing this like ludicrously optimistic science fictional thing, because when I wrote Neuromancer, anybody with half a brain woke up every day with the consciousness that that could be the humanity's last day. Everybody who knew what was going on in the world, I just took that for granted, because the U.S. and the USSR were sitting there with umpty billion nukes pointed at each other, and actual live humans with the controllers watching radar screens. I mean, in Tiptree's last couple of years, her letters are filled with this terrible, grinding resignation she and all of her friends in the CIA felt at the impending end of the world. So, and I went through my, you know, my childhood was very colored by that stuff. And it was still going on in 1981 when I started publishing fiction. And there didn't really seem to be any end in sight. The drying up and blowing away of the Soviet Union wasn't in sight yet. And so the world of the future of Neuromancer was to, and those early short stories, was to some very real extent created to depict a world that had a little bit of a nuclear war, and something had happened, probably the corporations just said, no, wait, this, you can't make it, we're not making any money, you can't do that anymore.
You can't make money if people are dead.
Yeah, you know, that's over. And consequently, you can't prove that the United States still exists as a political entity in Neuromancer. It seems to be some sort of system of city-states. But where I wasn't prescient, as I so often am not, the Soviet Union looms in the background, this like huge heap of slag, which is too big to fail. And so I did, you know, I missed that. If I'd gotten that right, people would have burned me as a witch eventually.
So it sounds like you feel that writing about a future where humans are still around is itself a kind of optimism, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think it is. It seems to, I think, you know, I really think, yeah, I really think it is. I don't know. I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of the novelist as a vehicle for boosterism, or the novel as a vehicle for boosterism, because my idea of what good novels do is to kind of go out and read the signs and come back and make something in image, and you know, the signs aren't always very good, and lately they're kind of looking pretty wildly ungood, but we never know. I mean, the nuclear wasteland of my childhood never happened, in spite of it having been this terribly real emotional place.
We kind of got through that, and now it's
now
another future.
Now we're doing something else. But yeah, I don't know. It's the I've never been a fan of didactic fictions, and I would assume that morale-boosting science fiction would necessarily be didactic.
Yes, you start out with a message.
In some sense. Although, then you can have there could be an alternative morale-boosting science fiction that doesn't necessarily depict futures that the dominant status quo today would be comforted seeing depicted. I mean, one man's dystopia is another man's paradise.
It's true.
Yeah.
I wanted on sort of on the same theme of optimism, I guess. I wanted to ask you about how you treat your characters, which a lot of critics and fans talk about as being, well, experience as being very gentle. Like, I feel as if you don't, a lot of science fiction writers and literary authors take a character and help you get invested in them and then kind of torture them or kill them or kind of want to, show you the ugliness of human character. And I feel like in your work, I never worry that I'm going to see a character brutalized for no reason. I feel like a lot of times there's almost a sense that the good guys end up surviving in a way that's relatively comfortable, and oftentimes bad guys get punished, but not in a horrible, brutal way very often. And I wonder if how you think about your characters. How do you think, like that they're actually people and you want to let them kind of speak for themselves, or do you feel like you're steering them a little bit into a future for that character that's a benevolent or at least not malevolent future?
Happy endings are about when you roll the credits. Mm-hmm. And
very true.
The futures that I can imagine for some of my characters who come out of the book with $200 and a new girlfriend, and they're happy as pigs in shit. Like what? That's when the credit roll. Mm-hmm. Like down the line.
But you leave the reader with that.
Not necessarily. Yeah.
You leave us with a sense of a kind of a gentle ending for Milgram, for example, or
dear. Well, I don't know. I mean, really. Really?
He's had a rough time, and I think
he's had a rough time. Look at his mother-in-law. They're going to Iceland to work for Big End? That's going to be good?
Hey, it's better than being locked up with a bunch of feds and, fed
true.
Drugs and things like that. That's a happy ending for a guy like that.
But it's
Iceland is a nice place.
Relatively. But, right at the end of the book, he looks across the ballroom of Big End's ground effect palace and realizes that Pamela is his fiance's mother. And to me, that was like poor Milgram. I mean,
yeah, he's going to keep getting pushed around, I think.
Just when he, just when he thought it was going okay. I don't know. it isn't that I'm taking care of them or protecting them. It doesn't feel that way. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is. I have a, and sometimes I can myself be frustrated by books that seem to me to be insufficiently realistic about the world's potential for just being a totally randomly bad place. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I have some empathy. I have some empathy with that, but it doesn't. I mean, to the best of my ability, it doesn't feel to me that that's exactly what I do. There's a kind of liminal space in that I can feel in my work between, you know, the harshest possible depiction of reality and just on the other side of the scrim, the ritual dance of fantastic fiction. And that in that little space, I myself find adequate room for the depiction and definition of the random evil of the world. If I moved it out of that interstitial place and put it at the front of the stage, people could see it, but I don't think it would have nearly as much chance of making someone aware.
Mm-hmm. I think that gets back to what you were saying about didacticism, like not wanting to have that heavy hand and kind of come in and push things around from the get-go.
Well, writers who consciously work out what's going to happen in their books, that's like literally incomprehensible to me. Coming from my method, because if I did that, I would get like the worst book. It would just be this hopeless thing, because the part of me that would write it would be the part of me that's sitting here talking with you, and I don't know how to do that stuff. Like my job when I write a book is to access a lot of parts of myself that aren't magical or they aren't particularly remarkable, but they're not available to me ordinarily. They become available through the process of writing the book. So I sometimes get that strange sense of sitting there and just like watching it happen, which is great. You know, it's good work. Good work when you can get it. I don't get it. I don't get it that often. But I'm very, very seldom am I sitting around going, well, if the butler did it, where did they hide the poker? It doesn't. That's sort of not my mode. And I don't see how you could, unless you were just an unbearably optimistic, Pollyanna-like writer, I don't see how you could just like get like wells of optimistic, good possibility. This is not a downer science fiction imagination coming up. But I can see how you could sit there and go, okay, what can I think of that will depict a happier future for Europe and the United States, or I don't know. It's a strange. I find that like just a very strange idea. I await its fruits. Actually, I await the fruits of that idea.
Of the optimism injunction.
Yes, or at least I await the reviews of the fruits.
Yeah, we'll see. So speaking of watching your work kind of appear, I just wanted to ask you a final question, which is, do you know anything about the Neuromancer movie, the all-Canadian production of Neuromancer?
Oh.
Have you worked with them at all or talked to them?
I'm quite good friends with the putative director, Vincenzo Natali, and I'm a big fan of his work. But beyond that, I don't like to talk about other people's work in progress. And after, the history of the different versions, different films of Neuromancer that have been, one could write a book, a terrible book, a book of terrible stories. But I would say that, it's still at the point where anything you hear, unless you should one day miraculously hear it from me, is just noise. Like when people are trying to get these things going, they make noise. So they're out there like crying across the primordial slops of the film industry, trying to attract another entity that will make it all mean something. And
across the social media prairies.
Yeah, and there's so what you're hearing, you're hearing cries and groans and various kinds of grunts, and I really have I have little more way of interpreting them than anyone else does. But I mean, it both touches me and horrifies me to see the ease with which people jump, seemingly, at least on Twitter, to the absolute conviction that, yes, now this is going to happen. But that said, it seems to me that it's in a better position to happen now than it has been before. So I suppose that's progress, at least.
Well, thanks very much to William Gibson for joining us today. The book, again, which is out in paperback, is Distrust That Particular Flavor. And on that note, a word from our sponsor. Audible.com is the leading provider of downloadable digital audiobooks and spoken word entertainment. Choose from books in every genre: science fiction, thrillers, drama, comedy, business, history, and more. One great pick is William Gibson's latest book, Distrust That Particular Flavor. Of course, there's over 100,000 titles to choose from. With audiobooks from Audible.com, reading is convenient and fun, whether you're commuting to work or flying to the other side of the world. Go to audiblepodcast.com/future to get a free audiobook. Download your choice when you sign up today. Again, go to audiblepodcast.com/future for your free audiobook.